Good morning. So I was having this thought about circular time and linear time, and how the voice of the future can sometimes infuse itself into the present and plant a seed, even though the person doesn't really fully understand it at the time. And so I'm thinking, what if Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, when he was speaking to Moses and Elijah, what if that was Elijah's moment in the cave, where the usual familiar God he knew, the God he knew, was found in the fire? He was bringing fire down upon the religious community that he didn't like. And suddenly he runs away from Jezebel. He's in this cave, and the fire comes, but God is not in it. Instead, it's a small, still voice. What if that was how he experienced that moment where he was meeting Jesus? Even though the small, still voice in his own perception was happening in the present moment of his life. Because eternity is not bound by linear time. Eternity respects the experience of the unfolding of linear time, but is not bound to it and can come in at any point. What if Moses, looking upon the promised land, was actually experiencing talking to Jesus, but didn't recognize it as such? So that's some of the thought I was going through. And so what if King David, when he wrote in Psalms, God, you don't even want animal sacrifice, goats and bulls. What you want is a contrite heart. That's the sacrifice of a contrite heart. That's what you want. So that would be 1,100 years before the book of Galatians would be written, and that sort of thing would be established. But he was way before the time. What if the spirit of the future came to King David and said, or Habakkuk, hundreds of years before the ministry of Jesus, and around the time when Paul would write that we're justified by faith and not law. Habakkuk writes, the just shall live by his faith, at a time when everything was justified by the works of the law. So what if we get visitations from the future version of ourselves and think, oh, that was an angel, or, because I firmly believe that in 2018, 2020, somewhere in there, when I went beyond just renouncing the dogma like I did in 2010, 2011, I renounced a lot of Christian dogma to go to universalism. But 2018, 2019, I renounced every trace of the person that I used to be in traditional Pentecostal Christianity, in order to untangle myself completely and step fully into the dream of spirit, soul, body equality, and thereby step into the teaching and speaking and being forthright about ethnic and gender equality. But what if, while I was renouncing or meeting with the previous version of myself, to grant the previous version of myself, the one when I was a prophet in Pentecostal Christianity, what if I was embracing that version of myself and say, thank you, but depart from me, I never knew you? What if Jesus was really speaking to every version of himself that he grew up with and was now needing to go on? When he went with Moses and Elijah, to me, he was saying, thank you, law and the prophets. You have raised me up, but now depart, for the Paraclete, or the Holy Ghost over me, says, not 3 tabernacles, like Peter was suggesting, not 3 tabernacles. This is my son, hear ye him. In other words, I'm bringing Moses and Elijah up to say, yes, thank you. You've raised me up, but now goodbye. And I feel like that's what I was doing in 2018, 2019. I was saying, the prophet of Pentecost that I used to be, I'm bringing you up to embrace you and to say thank you for the foundation you provided for me now, but goodbye. I can't have any trace element or entanglement to the person I used to be. I'm bringing you with me into the desired haven, into the desired life. And all I know is that in 2009, I had what I thought was an angel visitation so profound that I went prostrate on the carpet. My face hit the carpet. I was like, whoa, it's like an angel visitation. And the being that came in said, get up. And when I got up, the being said to me, your heart's desire is granted. And then, boom, vanished. And that angel, that being, had a very, very distinct energy signature. I'd never felt or seen that before. It was kind of a blue sapphire in color, but it was definitely the energy, it was definitely what I would call the wisdom realm. On a new level. Not the wisdom realm that gave me deeper revelation of Genesis 1 and Revelation 21, which was my life's work as a Pentecostal prophet, but a wisdom realm that was going to take things further. That's what it did. And then when I moved to Birmingham several years later, as I was entering the city in, May of 2011, so it'd be a few years later, as I was entering the city, there's that distinct presence again, that very distinct energy of the wisdom realm. Only it wasn't coming as a visitor. It was me. It was me. And I went, oh my God, that visitation I had, I think that was the future me. And that future me would be materialized more and more as I went, particularly bearing the fruit of it, the new path of spirit, soul, body equality, instead of crucifying the flesh to live only in the spirit, like you do in Pentecost. Yeah, in Pentecost, the leaders basically break you down, grind you to powder, and then raise you up their way, so that all that's left of you is spirit. All that's left of you is the ministry. So when this being said, your heart's desire is granted, my heart's desire was to live a full life, not just the spirit-only life, the full life, where your sexuality, your psychology, your interests, everything human is validated and actualized equally to the spiritual appetites for prayer and meditation and ministry. And it took about 8 years of living that life, fully stepping into it, for it to bear its fruit. And when I say bear its fruit, I mean the strength, the power, your gas tank is full. You are living in true vitality. You're not disoriented anymore. Because when you live 23 years in spirit only, crucifying the flesh, the human, when you start living balanced the way the Creator intended, it is so disorienting. It is like a midnight of the soul at first. It's very disorienting. Even though the revelation, the illumination is you have joy because you know this is God leading you. But the disorientation at first is horrific. So if your serotonin, what's the other feel-good hormones, if that all came from the life you had established in spirit over soul, or spirit only, or spirit identification, not human identification, spirit identification, the book of Galatians. It's also the law of one. It's also the Buddhist and Hindu material. It's most New Age channeled material. It's all of that. It's Christianity. It's Pentecostal Christianity. I am only the things Jesus says I am. Or I am love, I am joy, I am wealth. But when you conjoin it with the human identification points, now you are Mother Earth or Matter and Father Sky, heavenly. You're celestial and terrestrial, learning how to fall in love with each other. And so I really think that the voice of the beingness that I would carry in about 2019, 2020 was the paraclete, or the spiritual visitor that came back in time, that from spiral time or from circular time came back into linear time and gave me that visitation to set me free. Because my heart's desire was granted shortly thereafter. So I think Habakkuk experienced the spirit of the future coming upon him for that moment. Even though he might not have understood fully what he was saying, he knew he was supposed to say, the just shall live by his faith. I think David didn't necessarily understand what all that would mean, but he knew he was led to say, God, you don't even want bulls and goats. You want the heart. It didn't change. He didn't change the system. In fact, his son Solomon would sacrifice 140,000 animals at the temple dedication. So he didn't change anything, but he knew he was supposed to say that in the moment. Sometimes you're led to say things that you don't fully understand because it's not time yet. So your Eve, heading into the Eve part of you, the ground level part of you, is heading into a new illumination. And that new illumination is forbidden. It was forbidden for King David to say, no more animal sacrifice. No, that was written law. That was written in the theocratic government of Israel. That was written in the laws from Moses that came from God. You can't go again. David was entering forbidden. He was eating forbidden fruit. When he said, God, you don't even want this animal sacrificial system at all. You just want the heart, which was what Jesus would speak and Paul would speak 1,100 years later. So he was entering forbidden fruit, but the Adam part of you walks in the cool of the day, the established spirit of the era. It's the Eve part of you on ground level. Instead of just sitting in heavenly places, being seated in heavenly places in the established heavenly dimension, the Eve part of you is on ground level. That's the serpent of wisdom. Jesus said, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Both. Let your Eve and your Adam both do what they do. So the Eve goes into forbidden fruit, gets a new revelation. Paul even said it this way about the Eve part of himself. He said, I was raised up into the third heaven and heard unspeakable things that are not according to the law. Unlawful things I heard from God in the third heaven. Things that I can't even speak. So yeah, that's the Eve part of you going into things that are forbidden to speak until the proper time. So like Obadiah, he speaks against his own people and their treatment of immigrants. So does Isaiah in chapter 1. So does Ezekiel in Ezekiel 16. We hear a voice that others are not hearing. Jeremiah was in the school of the prophets. In Jeremiah, he is hearing and seeing the spirit of the future, the 70 years of the Babylonian captivity, and he's hearing it and speaking it. And the other prophets said, away with this man from the earth. We must kill him. Was it Jeremiah 26, verses 7 and 8? The other prophets, they were anointed prophets also. They were trained to hear God. They were accurate, usually. They were all accurate. They were all standouts in that school of the prophets. But they were not hearing what Jeremiah was hearing. When Paul on his Damascus road, he was Saul of Tarsus persecuting Christians. On this road to Damascus, it said that the men that were with him did not hear the voice. They could see the great light, but they heard no voice. Whereas Paul could hear it in an audible sense. So, actually, that's how I left the church I was part of for 23 years. It wasn't just that visitation from the future me. It was because I didn't really understand at the time what that meant. I just assumed, you must mean my desire for further ministry. A few years later, I look back on that and said, you're talking about what I'm coming into now as a full life reality instead of a spirit-only life. But at the time, I didn't really get it. But the last 23 years fully submitted to my leadership, which became, as I was an ordained prophet from 2003 until 2010 when I left. So for those last 7 years, my co-leadership and we bonded pretty deeply in the spirit, but we were very different on a human level, so we didn't really bond as friends, as people. but we did, Zion, the apostle, Zion Lawrence, her and I bonded pretty deeply in the spirit. But again, we were so different on a human level that we didn't talk a whole lot. But and here's where the Spirit of the Future came and spoke through our conversations the last 3 months. Spirit would just really get through to me that it's time to leave. Whereas I sought God with all my heart a few years prior. I said, please get me out of here, because I have this beautiful internal reality of this beautiful in loveness. But God and I are in love with each other. God is love with no judgment. You know, the Mike Bickle literature that I had read, I mean, that's what I bore witness to. It was faith in his grace, not faith in works. And they were all fire and brimstone preachers. So I was like, get me out of here, please, God. And Spirit's answer to me a few years prior was, I will, just not right now, because I have a work for you to do right here in the midst. You keep speaking the message of grace. And right about the time when a couple of the ministers started speaking that language just a little bit, the Spirit was like, okay, now that you fulfilled everything you came here for, now it's time to go. And because of the way things are in the Pentecostal Holiness churches, you can't just leave. Because if you leave that church, you're leaving God. That's the mentality. You're leaving God, and then you spend eternity in hell. If you leave our church, that means you got seduced by a deception. So I was like, God, is anybody going to bear witness to this, that you're leading me out of here? So I sensed that wasn't going to happen. But the last Sunday I was there, we were in worship and praise at the end of the church service. And I knew we were going to close out pretty soon. This is a very profound thing that happened. My spirit, without me consciously doing it, my spirit just prayed, Lord, show Zion a sign. Zion Lawrence was the apostle of our church. Show Zion a sign that I am being led by you as I move to Oregon. And literally within 5 seconds of me praying that, she stops the service, says, everybody stop right now. We're going to take communion. Now, bear with me as I tell you this, what happened. We're going to take communion, but the Lord just spoke to me and said that Doug is the only adult in this room who is worthy of taking communion today. So Doug's going to take communion, the kids are going to take communion, and then we'll be excused for the day. I had just prayed, Lord, show Zion a sign that I am being led by you, that what I'm about to do is of you. And that was the sign. But so the Spirit of the Future came in, the Spirit of my future came in, spoke to her something that she wouldn't really understand. She said it, and then after the communion was over, now I don't believe in communion. I don't believe that that's necessary. I don't believe what she was talking about being you have to be worthy to take communion. She gets that from Paul's letter to Corinth, that if you are living in sin and you haven't repented, you haven't done business with that, you haven't overcome it, and you take communion, you are drinking and eating damnation to yourself. You're damning yourself away from God's presence. He said people get sick and die when they do that. So that's where she was coming from. She was saying, God just showed me that Doug is the only one in this room who's living fully for God. That wasn't true. We were all kind of on the same page as far as dedication. But she needed that as a sign that she probably thought of that a few years later and said, oh, maybe that was God leading. Because when just minutes later, that sign she was shown concerning me went out the window. As soon as I told her, hey, God has shown me, last evening, God has shown me I am to move to Oregon. And she looked at me like, oh, her reaction was, all I see for you is devastation. Because their mentality is you can't leave. That's how it is in these cults. A real cult is such that the cult leader has the only truth. And wherever they've come to in their journey, that's the end-all, be-all finale of truth. There is nothing further. They don't allow their Eve to keep going into the next level. I mean, next level of dedication, sure. Next level of strength in that form. Galatians 4:19. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again, until Christ be formed in you. So that form, sure, they're very open to more and more dedication to that form. But what the Eve aspect of our being does, the serpent of wisdom, goes beyond the form. That's why it's forbidden. That's why the fruit of the Spirit in the next form, John 5:37, you Pharisees have not seen God's form. Eve brings the new illumination to bring a new formation of the Christ nature. So from law to grace is a new form. From grace to equality, anti-racist activism, gender equality activism, that's a new form from grace, because grace is the ability to just live above it all. Don't mess with society. They just need to look at Jesus. So grace keeps you above your humanity, but equality causes the bride to descend into your humanity, bring social change, and heal the nations. So from law to grace is a change of forms, and from grace to equality is a change of forms, not a strengthening of the original form. So the Adam part of you is seated in heavenly places, and is the Lord. It says of itself, I am the Lord, I change not. Jesus Christ yesterday, today, and forevermore. It cannot change because it's an established, crystallized form that you were birthed into by Spirit. The Eve part of you eventually, after resting in that Garden of Eden for a while, the Eve part of you is the crown. The crown of the baby starts to come out of the womb and goes into the next level, birthed out of the garden to start the next promotion, not demotion. So to go from being provided for, you just listen and obey, hear and obey, there's no other way. To go from provided for, whatever the scripture says, that's the only truth. However your pastor interprets the scripture, that's the only truth. You're provided for. Everything, you don't have to think. You don't have to have any critical thinking skills. You just listen to what the mentors say, and that's it. That's the Garden of Eden state. That's the babe state. But to be birthed out of that womb into the next state where you start having responsibility to delineate what's healthy and unhealthy for you in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you discard some things that you assumed were true, and you embrace some things that were maybe forbidden by those who went before you. So now you become the voice of the future that goes back into linear time, and without you even knowing it, your voice, your spirit voice that you establish, goes back in time and gets a few of those people that are still there and starts speaking to them, and then years later they see you and they go, oh, this is that. This is that. What you're doing is what I heard many years ago. Oh, I get it now. So the Eve part of, like Saul of Tarsus, it was the Eve part of him that said, did God really say that we should kill these people? Like they had just stoned Stephen. They conspired with Herod to get James the Lesser killed. Deuteronomy 13 says you must kill them if they lead to other gods. It was an established word from the Pharisee sect that Jesus was leading to other gods, such as Beelzebub, or what in the Old Testament is called the Ekron god, Beelzebub, who heals and brings plagues. So they thought he was healing and delivering people by the power of Beelzebub. That was the established word. So Deuteronomy 13 was a commandment from God to stone these people to death because the Jesus movement was leading them to other gods, according to how they perceived reality. So Saul of Tarsus was no murderer. He was just obeying the scriptures. And then that Eve part of him went into forbidden fruit on the road to Damascus. Something in him questioned it. Said, did God really say that? And then his own higher self took on a new form. Says, I am Jesus whom you persecute. I'm going to show you the things you will go through as I send you now to the Gentiles as a light. And eventually he would go to the Gentiles and establish churches. In his higher self took on a new form. Instead of Moses, it transfigured on the Mount of Transfiguration, and it transfigured to which was more like Jesus. So I believe the spirit of my own future self spoke to Zion. The me of 2019 came back in time, spoke to Zion that I was hearing from God. But once I told her that I was leaving, then that just went out the window, because it has to be established for you to converse with it and live with it. Otherwise it's just a visitation that will just plant a seed for you to ponder years later. And I had gone into 3 months worth of prayer for her, that she would understand the grace message instead of the works that she was preaching the harsh damnation message that she preached all the time. I mean, everything can be used for the good. I'll take the discipline, because it definitely made me deal with all my shit. She never she discerned people clearly, and she never let her disciples to just not deal with things that they had in them. So I'll take the cleansing for sure, but I couldn't stay any longer in that environment. It was time for me to go to my next iteration, which was universalism, not Christianity. And then from universalism for about almost 10 years, then equality from there. So that's Jesus on the road to Emmaus. He would go further. He was talking to the disciples who didn't recognize him because he was in a different form. He appeared to them in another form. And they burned in their hearts because they felt the Christ in him, and they were burning in their hearts, and he would go further. And they said, let's eat. Let's stop here and eat. So he obliged, and he ate with them. Opens their eyes, they see it's Jesus, and then he vanishes because he would go further. And that's the true Spirit of God, is the Eve part of us would go further. Like at the end of John 14, arise, let us go hence, go forward, go further, from glory to glory. Not just, now strength to strength is you're constantly growing in the form you've crystallized in. But glory to glory is form to form, shape to shape. The shape of your heart and emotions is different in grace than it was in law. And equality is different it's a different heart geometry. So the serpent of wisdom, Jesus said, again, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. So you operate in both, not one or the other. You don't just operate in the spirit, and you don't just operate in the flesh. The spirit and the flesh can join together, create a third kind of beingness that is greater than either alone. So the other thing that happened, for 3 months before that great moment, when I told Zion I was leaving, and then I left, and of course even though that sign was given to her, of course when I left, because I heard the voice, like it says in the book of Daniel, I heard the vision, I saw the vision, I heard the voice, and the men that were with me, it says in the book of Daniel, the men that were with me did not hear the voice. The men that were with me did not hear the voice. Only I heard the voice. And that verse had been given to me concerning the situation. That verse in Daniel came to me. It says, you're going to have to go in your move to Oregon. Spirit was ministering to me. You're going to have to go, and the people that you've called spiritual family for the last 23 years, they will believe that you are deceived and a heretic. And I just had to say, so be it. And that's exactly what happened. And I had to not be in contact with them, because I had to undo the energy field. The energetic link to their spirit, I had to undo it by no contact. Had I remained in contact, I would have, the progress in my life would have been much slower, because I would have been hindered by the trace elements that remained in me through contact. So, what else? But a few months before this, Zion had a dream and an interpretation of the dream. She had a dream about me that she gave me the interpretation of the dream, and I understood what it was saying. It was talking about me leaving and going and finding my tribe elsewhere. But she would fully embolden me to do that. It's just that she didn't know the application. Had she known that that's what the application of that dream interpretation was going to be, she never would have spoken it to me. I think if Habakkuk had known the interpretation of the just, of what he said by the Spirit, the just shall live by his faith. Had he understood the full application through the book of Galatians in the era of Paul and Jesus, he never would have said it. Some things are too shocking. The prophetic imagery comes to us and we see Eve goes and gets that new illumination. The Adam and Eve is the spirit and the soul. The spirit and the soul are one, but the soul is the ground level part of us, and the Adam or the spirit is the heavenly part of us. It gets established in a thing and lives there until it's time to change. And then Eve, on ground level, gets the new revelation, but is subtle. The serpent is subtle. The serpent is the most subtle part of us, the most subtle creation within us. It sees through a dim mirror, not face to face. The serpent is subtle because when you first get that blinding light, when you first get that new illumination, and she took that fruit and did give to Adam, and he ate also. Now your soul and your soul gives the new illumination to your spirit so that your spirit can establish a new sound and a new geometry to the heart. And once it's established, then you live in that Sabbath rest together, spirit and soul, and you operate until it's time for Eve to once again wander into forbidden fruit. Forbidden to the usual way. Forbidden to the way that you once established through, John 16:12 says, whatever you can bear, that's what's revealed to you, not everything God wants to show you. So John 16:12, Jesus says to the 12 disciples, and this is at the end of the 3-year period. He's done mentoring them. He's about to leave. And he says at the end of the 3 years of mentoring them, he says, there are many things I want to tell you, but I can't because you can't bear them. But by and by down the road, the Spirit will reveal. So in other words, by and by, the Eve party, the feminine energy that can intuit things that your spirit can't intuit, because your spirit's job is to establish the fruit that Eve gave to you. So that it's like this. Eve, the feminine energy, gets the new illumination, speaks it in part because she doesn't fully understand it yet, speaks it in part, and then gradually over time we go from a glass darkly to face. From childish things, put away childish things, become a man. In that form, in that revelation, become a man, meaning become mature in that revelation. Now, the Adam and the Eve are the heavenly and earthly personification, a new heavens and a new earth, the new spirit and the new personification of that spirit, Adam and Eve. Until it's time for another Mount of Transfiguration experience. And the new you, the new version of you, is always speaking to the old version of you. And the old version of you is praying for the new version of you to come without realizing what that's going to look like. Because if it realized what it's going to look like too soon, it would never accept anything. If the old version of me could see clearly, plainly, face to face what the new version of me today is doing, it never would have received it. So the old version of me had to see this 2020, the 2010 version of me had to behold in a mirror the glory of the Lord, the 2024 version of me in a mirror dimly, in a glass darkly. Because if it had seen the full blast version of me, it never would have. He said, "I rebuke you, devil," because it was forbidden, Because in 2011, as per the revelation of God, I spirit, soul, body equality. I got my sex life back in 2011. I dated a lot. Because when you crucify the flesh, you can't grow in your social life because you're used to only talking about God with people all day. So you don't really know what it is to have a human-to-human friendship, just human-to-human as is, without a bunch of God talk. So I had to get a social life back that it did not involve spiritual stuff. Sex life, eventually a romantic life with my life partner Amber. So sex, romance, psychology, growing in my social skills, growing in my human-to-human relationship, and eventually social movement, social change, social reform. That all kicked in because of the new revelation that my Eve gave to my Adam, and he did eat. And now we established the new heavens and the new earth for this iteration. Just like in 1987, I left the secular me for the Christian me, and we established that. You see? Hope that makes sense. So perhaps Caiaphas When he prophesied by the Spirit that one man shall die for the sins of the people, and Christians applied that to, well, Jesus will die for your sins, even though the true Creator does not need blood. You know, they believed it was hardwired. It was hardwired into them that without the shedding of blood, there's no atonement. So God has to work with you where you're at. So the immediate future, they weren't going to be able to handle the idea that God never needed to kill anything to forgive you. So they took the crucifixion of Jesus as a lamb sacrificed. They took it that way. So when that, which they eventually established in the coming decades, Jesus dying for the sins of the people, that spirit of that coming decades, 30 AD on to about 70 AD. I'm sorry, I have to drink so much water because of a blood issue I have. And I drink so much water, and so it causes I burp throughout the message sometimes. Okay, so but hell, I'm just keep speaking. So perhaps the spirit of the future came back in time in 33 AD and spoke through Caiaphas, one man shall die for the sins of the people, in a way that he didn't even understand what he was talking about. Had he understood the application, he never would have said it. Because it would have implied that, you know, killing Jesus would have been the perfect lamb sacrificed for the sins of the world, which would make him the actual Messiah, and he would never would have said it if he understood that what it meant. But he said it because he was being led to say it. I think Zion was telling me stuff about, you know, leaving and going and finding my tribe. Had she understood what those words meant in their application, she never would have said it. I think me understanding in 2010, having a visitation from my future self, had I understood the full implication, I never would have went with it. I had to understand it in a dim mirror, understand it in part, because like John 16:12 says, many things I want to say, but I can't say them to you in fullness because you can't bear it right now. So the Eve part of us sees it in part. So what I'm saying is, keep going. Keep going. Never settle for where you're at as the end-all, be-all finale of truth. Sure, it's fine to strengthen yourself more and more in what you're into, but be open to the next thing. And with discernment, of course. You know the difference between what is healthy and not healthy. But you also can be open to the idea of smashing paradigms that are based on phobias of people that are not like you. Smashing paradigms that you inherited from colonialism, the generations before you. Smashing those paradigms may strike you as unhealthy, but you may open those things up and look inside and realize that they came from racism, homophobia, and misogyny. And when those things are broken open and you see it for what it is, you can go further and believe in inclusion and celebration, a celebration of that which is other. And that's the Mount of Transfiguration. And when you get there and you establish that, you may just have a memory, maybe 15 years from now, you may have a memory that of, you know, something that happened last week where something came to you from the Spirit that you didn't fully understand, and you're like, oh, this is that. This is. So for me, I look at the stadiums being filled when Kamala Harris speaks, and I'm like, Bob Jones prophesied this. Prophet, not the school, not the guy that owned the Christian school. I mean, the prophet from the 1960s through the 1990s. The prophet Bob Jones said, revival will break out and stadiums will be filled. Now, if he understood the application, oh God, he would have rebuked the devil. You know, him and some of his contemporaries said, yeah, Hollywood movies will reveal my glory, says the Lord, and people will be crying in the movie theater. I've cried in many movies that were about equality in the gender spectrum, in the orientation spectrum. That happened. People are changing. Society is experiencing the Mount of Transfiguration through Hollywood. You know, if you're angry, if you're not angry that they took the brown-skinned, the brown-skinned Middle Eastern Jesus and made him white. You're not angry about that. But you are angry about Ariel, who in the literature, original literature, was a green-skinned or olive-skinned mermaid. Hollywood made her white, and now Hollywood made her a light-skinned black girl. You're raging, fuming at the mouth like a rabid dog because they made Ariel a black girl. But you're not angry that they made brown-skinned Jesus a white dude. Maybe break that open and see what phobias are there. So that's the Mount of Transfiguration. And then establish it. Keep going. Keep going until that you have full harmonization within. Spirit, soul, and body. Harmonization. All the glories of the human and all the glories of the spirit in their equality marriage produce a third kind of beingness that is greater than either alone. And just maybe then you'll say, hey, 15 years ago this thing came to me from the Lord that I didn't understand, but now I get it. Thank you, guys. May the future come now. May the future you, or the future reality of the spiritual atmosphere, may it come now as we touch and agree with it, whatever that looks like for you. May it come now and visit you.